So it took me 3 attempts to get into physical therapy school, and there was a lot of frustration along the way because the first 2 times I tried to get into PT school, I basically had no interviews, no one reached out back to me, and I wasn't really sure what I was doing wrong. So today I kind of wanted to share some of the things that I did to finally have a breakthrough so that on the third time I applied to physical therapy schools, I ended up getting into 6 out of the 7 schools I applied to. So a little bit of the background, I applied to physical therapy school right away coming out of college. So I applied, it was like during the fall of my senior year of college, I started applying to schools. I applied to 5 different schools along the West Coast, although I was at the East Coast at the time for college. And basically, I got nowhere. I got no interview offers or anything. And at the time, I wasn't too surprised by that. You see, what happened was I didn't go into college with like an exercise science or a kinesiology degree. What I ended up doing is I went into college with a biomedical science degree, and so it wasn't quite aligned with the physical therapy field, but I didn't know what I wanted to do at the time. So because of that, I wasn't getting any clinical hours within the physical therapy field, which is what a lot of physical therapy schools require. And there's not always like the exact same hard limit per school, but often it's anywhere from like 400 to even like 1200 hours of what physical therapy schools want to see, because they may have a limit of saying, oh, you only need 200 hours in clinics in order to apply to the school. But when you actually look at the catalog, so most schools will provide on their website what the incoming cohort stats are based on like their GPA and the amount of hours they had, and a lot of times it's in the thousands or even multiple thousands. And so I had a good GPA. I was at a 3.8 GPA, but my hours were pretty low. I switched over to an exercise science degree my sophomore year of college because I really didn't enjoy like chemistry and physics very much. And I did shadowing at like genetics labs and research labs and realized I didn't want to go that route. So I switched over to exercise science. I enjoyed that a lot more, but I still wasn't sure within that field what I wanted to do until my junior year when I settled on physical therapy after some shadowing at a couple clinics. But really, I only had like probably 2 days worth of shadowing. So I basically had no hours. And in my senior year, I was planning to start getting more hours, but then COVID hit. And so I couldn't shadow anywhere. And so when I was applying in the fall, I had a feeling I was like, well, I really don't have a lot of hours, but we'll see just because of COVID and people not being able to get hours, how things would look. But yeah, I didn't get anywhere. So I got out of college and me and my wife moved down to Phoenix, partially because there wasn't really any physical therapy clinics open up here in Oregon because their COVID restrictions were a bit more tightly regulated at the time. So I didn't really have any opportunities to go to a clinic and get any shadowing experience. And even in Phoenix, I couldn't shadow at a clinic, but there was more job opportunities as like a physical therapy aide or technician. And so that's the route I ended up going, was going for a job. And there's pros and cons to that. The pros is obviously you're getting paid and you're going to get a lot of hours because you're just working there. But the con is that you're not able to like spread your experience across a lot of clinics because especially at the time you couldn't really just go shadow at clinics. It was still like post COVID, within a year or two post COVID, and a lot of those clinics were barely even just accepting like the graduate school students that were going on their clinicals. So because of that, I basically accrued all my hours just in that one clinic. And so when I reapplied the next year, I did have more hours. I was around 800 hours or so, but it was the same thing as the first time I applied. I think I applied to 6 schools this time, and I got one interview, but I didn't make it past like their initial like group stage interview. So I basically barely got anywhere with one school, and the rest of them all duds again. And at this point, I was pretty frustrated. I was almost contemplating if I should even keep going through with this career path because I felt kind of stuck. I was gonna have to go through a whole another year of work, and at least where I lived in Phoenix, I was like, I know I probably need some acute care shadowing, but I can't get that unless I get a job in acute care, which I didn't want to do because the only job offer that I could get in the area was almost an hour commute for me, and I wasn't super excited about the acute care setting as a tech. And so because of that, I kind of did a bit of a risky move, but I ended up just staying at the clinic I was working at and basically just trying to accrue even more hours at that one clinic. But there were some other areas where I decided to really change how my applications look. So on my third time around applying, right, so fast forward another year, I got more hours. I was probably closer to 1,700 hours now, going to the next application cycle. And this time I applied to 7 schools, kind of all over the West Coast, and 2 schools in Arizona. But this time, all my applications, I was a lot more specific. And this is kind of the second major thing. The first thing is trying to spread out your hours to get into school. The second thing, outside of just having a good GPA and GRE score, is going to be tailoring your applications specifically for those physical therapy schools you're looking at, right? Because you can get a lot of information from the school and from a lot of the professors and faculty on the program just by looking on their website and getting some information online. So what you can do is use this information to your advantage. So on your applications, before you even get to the interview stage, you need to find a way to stand out from the crowd. And like I had kind of an average amount of hours, but it was mostly in one setting, and I had a pretty average GPA. I had a 3.8 GPA, which was pretty good, but it was right around the average for most schools. Most schools was anywhere from like 3.7 to the 4.0 range. So I wasn't really standing out in those categories. But I tailored my applications to kind of use like the buzzwords that that school would use like on their website, and I would kind of focus my application around the mission statement for the school and basically kind of show that, one, I did some research on the school, which is good. I even did some research on the professors to see like what areas of research and like specialty does the school focus on. Where do they focus on in helping the community for outreach? And like, are they more like a manual therapy, like heavy based school? Are they a research based school? Are they focused on going out and being a big part of the community? So find out like what that school is about. Also realize if that's a school that you match well with, because it's a two-way streak. You want to first of all think that the school is a good fit for you and that you're a good fit for the school. It goes both ways, and you have to reveal that on your application about why you would be a good fit for the school, but also how will this school be a good fit for me as well, and how will I work within this program to further this program. So once I started doing that, using some of the buzzwords from the school and really tailoring each application different for each school, I found a lot more success. So on the third round applying, I started getting a lot of interviews, and I ended up getting into 6 out of the 7 schools I applied to. And I'm gonna talk about another video about the one school I didn't get into and why it was actually a little bit devastating because I was like the top school I wanted. So it was a little tricky because now I got into 6 schools that I really like. I didn't get into my best school because I didn't even get an interview. Um, but then I had a tough choice because a lot of the schools are pretty tiered out with how they do their interview process. Some schools are going to be really early, like in the summer, where other schools don't even have interviews until like January. And so it's tricky because some schools, they require not just a deposit, but also a few months out from the interview, they want you to make a decision if they give you an offer about whether you're going to be in the program or not, because they want to make room for more people coming through in the later stages of interviews. So I was put in a bit of a bind because I got into a couple pretty good schools right off the bat. But then there was like 2 other schools that I was even a bit more excited about. But I was waiting all the way until like January or February to see if I got into those schools because their interviews were later. And so I had a bit of a battle where I had to figure out, is it worth saying no to these schools and take a risk that I would get into the schools that I would rather get into. Luckily for me, it worked out, but it was a little bit risky. So it's also something to think about is when you're applying to schools, also look at when their interviews are and when their deadlines are for applying to the program and actually accepting that. So a couple things I would list out. I would definitely make a spreadsheet of all the schools you want to apply to. I would take a look at how much the school costs, because that should definitely be a factor to look into. See if they accept in-state tuition, because that can be a factor if you think you might not get in, but you want to maybe move to that state to try to get in-state tuition. That's a possibility. And then also look at basically the interview timelines. So you can compare between the schools. And then also like the big buzzwords and like their mission statements. So get that onto a spreadsheet and start tailoring your application to those things, and probably pick anywhere from like your 4 to 8 top schools. Because remember, each school is going to cost a certain amount of money between not just the applications, but flying out for interviews, like booking transportation once you're there, like the hotels, everything, and then also making a deposit for the schools, because some schools only give you like half your deposit back if you end up not wanting to go into the school. So there's a decent amount of cost. So if you spread too wide of a net and you try to apply to like 15 schools just in a hope to get into one, you could end up spending a lot of money, and then maybe you do get accepted into a school, but it's like not one you're really excited about, and then you end up going there, and maybe you should have waited one extra year to get into a school that you really want to get into, right? So definitely make a list, and I would say honestly, just apply to schools that you actually want to go to. So I had basically a list of like schools I really wanted to go to, and schools that I was like I still wanted to go to, but they weren't like as exciting for me. But there was no schools on my list where I was like, I don't want to go there. Like there's no point applying to a school if you really don't want to go there just to get into a program. Okay, so make a list like that. Don't put all your eggs into one basket and only apply to one school. That's just a risky game, and it's not really worth the effort if you don't get in, because then you have to wait a whole another year for basically nothing. So if some of these tips helped, let me know in the comments below, and also comment if there's any other strategies that you use to get yourself known on these applications to get to the interview stage. And like and subscribe to hear the next video about how I didn't get into the one school that I really wanted to.